Well, I hope you found the reading for week number one helpful, and you gained some insight on the three different approaches to social research. This week, what we're going to do is build on that foundation by taking a journal article and using it as practice to dissect that article, engage it, and try to make some sense out of it. The article that we're going to be using for this is Factors Influencing Adult Learners' Decisions to Drop Out of or Persist in Online Learning. It's on the Foxtel site. So you can look at the assignment and see the particulars of what's being asked for. Remember that it will be due by Sunday of the second week. In the meantime, if you have any questions about it, you can certainly contact me. Let's talk a little bit about how to engage a journal article and relate it to this assignment, though. Okay. Now, journal articles, I told you this before, they're not written for the general public. They're written for other professionals. So they use that really esoteric language. They use a lot of jargon, those kinds of things. So to the uninitiated, they sound mysterious, maybe a little boring. Okay. So how helpful are they if you don't really know what you're reading? And that's a common response and a reasonable and understandable one. So here's what we're going to do. I mean, you're an educator and you want to use the information provided by researchers to improve educational practice and schools. So obviously there has to be a place where we can meet and be useful. So here's what I would tell you as some suggestions about when you engage a journal article. It really doesn't matter whether it's a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods type of research. All journal articles have 5 component parts. They may be finessed in different ways, they may be presented in different ways, but really all of them have these 5 things that are there. The first component of a journal article is the introduction. Okay, big surprise, right? You have to start somewhere, so the introduction is a good place. But in the introduction, there's something very important that's embedded within the first paragraph or 2 of a journal article. It's something called a problem statement. And the problem statement, or a statement of the problem, is simply the issue under investigation. So the author or the authors will identify what the issue is and why it's important. That's called a problem statement. Now, one of the things I want you to do in this assignment is to identify the problem statement, this issue that's under investigation, and why the authors thinks it's important. And you'll find it. You'll find it within the first couple of paragraphs. That's all I'm going to say about that. The second component of a journal article is review of the literature. Now, this may be embedded in the introduction of a journal article, or it can be separated out and actually labeled as review of the literature or literature review. There are different ways of crafting that. But all journal articles will have some sort of review of the literature. And what we mean by that is that it presents a synopsis of previous research that's important, that relates. You can't identify all the previous literature necessarily, but maybe talk about the fundamental ones, the most important ones. Again, in this assignment, I want you to give me a brief summary of what you're picking up about the previous literature that the authors are identifying in this particular article. The third section is something called the methods section. It can be either, and it's always labeled methods or methodology. So it's separated out in virtually every article you'll find. Often it's a very short section, it's not terribly long, but the methods section identifies the research design, in other words, how the data are collected, was it survey, experiment, personal interviews, existing data, and how they're analyzed. And that would be a dead giveaway for the most part on whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. If they're talking about they're using statistical procedures to analyze the data, and we're talking about quantitative. Okay. The fourth section is called the findings, and typically this is labeled very specifically the findings or results. Okay, and it's a very, there's not a lot of hyperbole here, there's not a lot of, you will not find exciting words like this was interesting or this was surprising kind of a thing necessarily. It's just kind of like the facts are being laid out. This too will be a dead giveaway what kind of article you're dealing with, what kind of research. If it's a lot of tables with numerical and statistical procedures, it's quantitative. If it's the findings are being narrated out, then it's qualitative. There may be a table, but even the table will have like words rather than numbers included in them. Or if it's mixed methods, you'll see a little bit of both. Okay. And then finally, the fifth section of every journal article is the conclusion. And in the conclusion, there are a couple of things to really look for in the conclusion. One is that very often the author or authors of an article will recap their findings in narrative form. Even if it's quantitative research, they'll tell you, they won't necessarily restate the numbers. They'll kind of tell you what the findings are, the highlights, what the most important findings are. And the second thing they'll do is they'll tell you what it means, the implications of it. So in the conclusion, you can look for what are the major findings and what do they mean. Okay. And there might be a third thing in the conclusion, suggestions for future research or something like that. But for our purposes, when we're trying to consume the findings in a journal article, what it all means, then what are the major findings? What do they mean? So if you can tie together the problem statement found in the introduction with the major findings and the implications found in the conclusion, that might give you a way to make better sense of a journal article. Okay, so do the best you can with this assignment. Don't stress out. Remember, we're learning here. We're all learning. If you have any questions, just let me know.